of the UK. It is a dry day, albeit rather cloudy. That's set to change on Wednesday. Areas of rain move north across the country, turning to snow over northern hills later.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good afternoon. It's time to debate the big issues of the day with me, Anaya Flaren Iman and Liam Halligan, and a whole host of guests. Today, we're asking, with Omicron cases spreading, how can we mitigate school disruptions? Should they remain open? All that to come, but first, here's the news with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date at 2 o'clock. Cabinet ministers are meeting this afternoon to discuss the latest situation and potential measures around COVID-19. Some MPs have reportedly pushed back against calls from scientific advisers for new restrictions before Christmas. According to the Times newspaper, around a third of the Cabinet are said to be reluctant to introduce new measures in the next few days. The government's chief scientific adviser, though, Sir Patrick Vallance, is urging for tightened rules to prevent the NHS from being overwhelmed. Hospitality leaders are urging the Chancellor to offer emergency financial support in the next 24 hours after a fall in bookings due to the Omicron variant. The operator of the Real Greek and Franco Manca restaurant chains say rescue packages are needed regardless of whether further COVID measures are introduced. Meanwhile, the chief executive of the Nighttime Industries Association, Michael Kill, told GB News the new restrictions are confusing, with businesses encouraged to stay open, but customers told to stay away.
We're hugely concerned, not only for the survival of businesses, but people's livelihoods. People that we've committed and managed to build up and gain momentum for this trade is now being stifled massively. COVID passes were presented as a mitigation that would keep nightclubs open. That's clearly not the case. And the concern that we have is at some point leading up to New Year's Eve is going to create some level of displacement. And that could go into things like illegal events or push people back into households, but which we know full well are, highly transmissible.
The Labour Party is also urging greater support for businesses through the festive period. They're calling for the reintroduction of sick pay for employees who've tested positive with COVID-19 or those who have to self-isolate with symptoms.
What you don't want in a situation like this is businesses and workers having to calculate, should we do the right thing here or is there a cost to us? So it's really important that we've got a good sick pay system in place and one that is also helpful to the small businesses involved.
The Deputy Prime Minister has denied his colleagues broke lockdown rules after a picture emerged showing the Prime Minister and his staff having cheese and wine in the Downing Street garden during the first national lockdown. The Guardian newspaper released this photograph showing the Prime Minister drinking at a table with Carrie Johnson and 2 others. 16 other staff members were nearby. Dominic Raab, though, stressed the garden was a place of work and that sometimes, he said, staff would have a drink after a long day or a long week. Retired teachers are being urged to return to the profession to try to help with COVID staff shortages in the new year. Some schools are already preparing for the possibility of online learning, but the Education Secretary is appealing for qualified teachers across primary, secondary and further education to return to classrooms to try to maintain face-to-face teaching. Now, in other news, at least 375 people have died. More than 500 are injured following the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines this year. More than 50 others are still missing. Officials say several central provinces are struggling with power and communication outages, and they're pleading for food and water. At its strongest, Typhoon Rai brought winds reaching up to 168 miles an hour. The World Economic Forum has delayed its annual summit in Davos following concerns over the Omicron variant. The conference, held in the Swiss mountain resort, sees major political and business leaders from around the globe attending. The meeting will instead be held in the early summer. Television presenter Rachel Riley has been awarded £10,000 in damages after winning a libel case against a former aide to Jeremy Corbyn. The Countdown presenter sued Laura Murray over a tweet that was found to be defamatory. At the time, Ms Murray was a manager in the then Labour leader's office. The High Court judge said the tweet, posted more than 2 years ago, had caused serious harm to Rachel Riley's reputation and that she was due vindication. The sandwich chain Pret a Manger has been told to consider reviewing its advertising campaign for a £20 a month coffee subscription after reports of complaints from customers. It's the advice from the Advertising Standards Authority. Pret subscribers can choose 5 drinks a day as part of the deal. Consumers, though, have complained they were often unable to get smoothies on the deal, as many shops said they were unable to make them. You are right up to date. I'll bring you the latest headlines in half an hour.
Coming up in the next hour, with a surge of Omicron cases affecting teachers, we're asking, should schools remain open?
Plus, what is the Omicron situation like elsewhere in the UK? We have a report from our Scotland reporter as social distancing measures are affecting the hospitality industry there.
And what is the future of HS2? We'll find out more from our Yorkshire reporter next.
Absolutely, and of course, it's not just our guests we want to hear from. Join the conversation with your view. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews.
Come back to the classroom. That's the message going out to retired and supply teachers from the Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, as he looks to keep schools open despite rising Omicron case numbers in the classroom. Here's what he had to say.
It's been my absolute priority since day one in the role of doing everything in my power to protect education. That involves a number of things, but very importantly, it means making sure that schools and colleges have the teaching staff they need to safely deliver face-to-face education. Now, although 99.9% of schools have consistently been open this term, we can all see the tidal wave of Omicron coming our way. That is why today I'm asking any teacher no longer in the profession to come forward if they are available to temporarily fill absences in schools and colleges in the new year.
Well, the rapid spread of the new variant is expected to force teachers to isolate, and officials at the Department for Education admitted yesterday that Omicron could cause disruptions until early Easter.
Some schools are already preparing for the possibility of online teaching and have told pupils to take laptops home in case of changes over the Christmas break.
Schools have already faced huge challenges since the start of the pandemic, so is it time that we prioritise our education system and keep schools open? We're now joined by a microbiologist at the University of Bath, Dr. Andrew Preston. Thank you so much for joining us. What do you think? Do you think schools should close?
Only at the very, very last resort. I think the driver for the decision on restrictions has predominantly been pressure on the health service. So again, we don't have much information about which sectors or what restrictions we could put in place that are going to have a real effect on decreasing Omicron cases. So of course, we're still operating primarily in a sort of black hole of knowing what's going on. I guess my observations from having worked with local schools were that we saw a dramatic increase in cases in the autumn, and that was notably when some of the mitigation measures had been lifted during the summer. So again, the bubbling, the staggered start and ends to the days, and of course, the more controversial one of wearing masks in classrooms. So I think there are still things that can be done if the determination is that education is the last thing that really should be affected by this.
Dr. Preston, good to see you on the show as ever. Surely by the time we get through the Christmas period into the new year, when schools go back, we'll have evidence from South Africa and elsewhere about the extent to which Omicron does cause hospitalisations, does cause fatalities. A lot of the evidence so far seems to show, while it's more contagious than Delta, the variant that we've lived with for the most part so far, it's a lot less harmful.
That's what we're hoping for. Certainly, South Africa have consistently reported fewer hospitalisations than they would expect for the numbers of cases observed. We have to wait to see whether that extrapolates to our population. Compared to South Africa, we suffered pretty badly in terms of severe disease and deaths, as we did against many other countries. So it's clear there are significant differences between the two populations, and we just don't know how they're going to play out in terms of Omicron. As you say, I think the good thing is that, by the time the schools return, we will have more data. Of course, what we're doing now, the big consideration is, do we need to put in restrictions now to prevent hospital cases from rising? So maybe if the cabinet do decide that they want to put in restrictions now, that will help ease the pressure, which means it will be obviously less of an issue for the schools to go back. But again, we don't know the effect of mask wearing, still having the classroom with the hyper-infectiousness of Omicron. And of course, you've then got the very real issue of asking kids to miss education for the sake of predominantly protecting other age groups. But that's part of living in a society, I guess.
Yeah, and Dr. Preston, on that same point, I mean, it does feel like young people and children have had to sacrifice an immense amount over the last 18 months plus. I mean, do you really think it would be fair to ask them to bear the burden, essentially, of mitigating the pandemic by losing more education at this critical time, in their development? Again, I'm in a situation that could be pretty severe if the worst modelling comes to fruition. Then fairness isn't necessarily something that can be taken into account. I mean, it's a lose-lose situation. So many people have borne burdens from pandemic, both in terms of the disease and the mortality. So if you look at mortality, it was mainly the older age group that bore the burden of the mortality, of course. And we've seen heavy job losses in hospitality and travel and other industries. So there's been burdens throughout. So, I mean, it's unfair all round. It's no one's fault. And so fairness, is a really hard one to work out how to make this a fair process, because I'm not sure there is a way to do so.
It is true to say, isn't it, Dr. Preston, that the UK has locked down schools to a greater extent than many other European countries. Why do you think that is?
I think we've had certain nuances of the pandemic here that haven't necessarily played out in terms of other countries. So it's a situation-specific scenario, of course. And I don't think anyone's found the right way through this. We're all, all countries, I think, are slightly operating on a trial and error basis, that they're putting in restrictions that they hope will press the right levers to suppressing the virus when those restrictions are brought in to do so. And it's clear that, some very harsh measures work in the short term, but then you have to do something useful with that time in which you are locked down. Otherwise, when you unlock it, it just resumes again. So all you do is just push it down the road. And we've seen that, you think you've got it right. We've unlocked during the summer, and it seemed that we tacitly acknowledged that the sort of 100 or so case deaths per day was a price that we were prepared to pay for that return to somewhere near normalcy. And of course, now the situation's changed with Omicron, so we're having to try and almost experiment all over again, waiting for this data to come through. It's a really tough situation, so no one has the answer, I don't think.
I mean, you say that no one has the answer, but obviously, even with the information that we don't have, we have to make a decision. So as a microbiologist, Dr. Preston, I mean, with the information that we have right now, whether that's coming out of South Africa or as we're learning as days go, I mean, what advice would you give the government at this stage?
If your only or your real prime concern was about suppression of transmission of Omicron, you would lock down now. That's the precautionary way, and that, of course, would cut transmission, and it would stop the risk of running into that scenario of the NHS being completely overwhelmed by a ridiculous number of cases each day. Of course, if your focus is perhaps like the Treasury on the economy and all the other wider aspects of society, if you're focused on that, you say, well, we can't lock down, we can't in place any restrictions because they cause terrible other unintended damage. And of course, the problem that number 10 has to try and weigh up and balance those two diametrically opposed views. And again, I keep saying it's a lose-lose situation. I'm not sure there is a way to balance it. So as a microbiologist, if I'm saying, well, my keen sort of priority is to suppress the virus, then you lock down immediately without doubt. But of course, there's such terrible damage that doing that, it's not cost-free.
Dr. Andrew Preston, microbiologist at University of Bath, thanks as ever for appearing on GB News.
Well, joining us now on the show is Glyn Potts, who's a head teacher at Newnham Roman Catholic College in Oldham. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, how is your school preparing at this moment, at this really critical time?
I mean, we're doing everything we can to make sure that the school remains open, because that has to be the priority. Young people need the safety and the education that we provide, but also they need the hope that we can all get through this. Listening to the last interview, I can understand it is a balancing act, but schools are resilient places with staff who do fantastic work, and we've got to keep fighting to make sure they remain open to do their best by the children that we serve.
What would you say, Mr. Potts, to colleagues who are teachers at your school, elsewhere, who think it's not right that they should come in again in the new year, that they're going to stay at home? Because if they decide that, then whatever the government does, we can't open the schools.
I think those anxieties are natural. And the teaching population, and not just the teachers, the support staff in schools, have put those anxieties to the side to come in to serve the young people. I understand the rhetoric around this is changing with the Omicron virus strain, and we've got to try and mitigate those risks. Rather than us talking about opening up or locking down, let's talk about what else we can do to mitigate those risks. It's interesting that the department are asking for retired teachers to come back into the profession in a short-term basis. Perhaps my colleagues in Ofsted would prefer to do that firstly.
And on that same point, I mean, what do you think then we can do? Because it does seem we're getting into a kind of perpetual lockdown mentality. What are the other possible measures we could do to mitigate this?
Well, I think we know all about ventilation and we know all about filters, but not every school has those opportunities. If we know we're going to be facing this into Easter and if not beyond, why not invest in those systems that mean that schools can have safer, cleaner air circulation around the building? Let's also talk about the fact that masks have been removed from the classroom, and I understand that they're not popular. But if this means we can stop and slow the spread of the virus and continue to keep schools open, then surely masks in classrooms are a minor adjustment to the long-term goal. I think we have to be clear on the objective. And for me, it's remaining open, making sure the children can come to school and have an experience that means they can still enjoy their youth at the moment.
Mr. Potts, I've got 3 children of school age or university age. I personally think the locking down of schools and universities has been disastrous for young people, despite the efforts of some educationalists to mitigate the impact. As a head teacher, what do you think?
I understand why we locked down. I'm not here to make a decision on whether it was right or wrong. I think it created far more complex issues in the education system. If you look at the Department for Education report 3 days ago, even they are saying that their catch-up programme is likely to be inadequate. So we have to ask ourselves, if we did that to protect the NHS, are we still doing that now? And if we still are, what are we going to do to get back on track? These young people have faced this with great maturity and with humility. We need to acknowledge that they are still facing these difficulties with humility and responsibility. Let's find a way to make sure we can work through this.
And Ms. Potts, if there was a minister right here that you can kind of tell them something about, how to manage this, what would you say?
I would don't abuse the trust and hard work and dedication of school staff. It feels very much that the Department for Education are working very hard. I accept that. But school leaders are best placed to make the decisions on how to keep their schools open. And commentary around Ofsted visiting schools and the examination and pressure of all of those things, that's not helpful. Give us the tools to do the job. Let us keep the schools open. Let us do what we do best. And then get out of the way so that the young people can be served in the way that we need to do.
How important is it, Mr. Potts, that the teaching unions remain constructive in their attitudes if we are going to get schools open in early January?
Yeah, I understand there are a variety of views amongst the teaching unions, but there's also some very sensible, very calm and rational thoughts on how we can all achieve the common goal. And I go back to the point, my union, ASCL, and Jeff Barton has been very clear that if we open those communication chains and trust school leaders to do their jobs, that we're more likely to have that success. But what we can't have is schools saying that there's a crisis with staffing, schools finding it difficult to raise attendance of young people, and then Ofsted coming in and making judgments on their performance during a time when we're apparently business as usual. We need to find the common ground, and surely the common ground is the success of young people in school, learning, and as best we can, enjoying their time.
And also, I know that you said that, you understand why we locked down in the beginning and it has created challenges and complexities, but what harmful effects has actually happened in relation to children's education and learning over the last 2 years?
I serve a very diverse community. 43% of my community are recognised by the government as being from a disadvantaged background. Some of them live in high-rise tower blocks. Some of them don't have access to gardens. The whole issue around mental health is a time bomb that I don't think we've yet contributed enough to thinking and to resolving. But equally, schools, if you look back at your own schooling, you don't always remember the top maths lesson, but you'll remember the play that you were in. You'll remember the school trip. You'll remember your friends. They are critical to the happiness and well-being of young people alongside the examinations that we offer. They are what are being impacted on by this COVID disruption. And actually, what we need to accept is that there is a common goal here, the future well-being of a population that will go on and make a difference in the world. Let's work together to do that, but let's not ignore the fact that they're having a difficult time of it.
Glenn Potts, head teacher at the Newman Roman Catholic College. Thanks a lot for joining us on GB News.
Well, remember to join the debate. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews.
Still to come, new restrictions have come into force to ensure social distancing in Scotland. But how has this affected the hospitality industry north of the border? We'll find out next.
But first, let's have a look at the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. It's simply more of the same for many of us today. Cloudy again across large parts of the country. Something a little brighter in the east as the cloud lifts, and somewhat breezy in the southwest on the edge of this area of high pressure where the isobars are a little closer together. Now this cold front, barely noticeable on the map there, will introduce some slightly drier air and higher cloud bases, I think, through the afternoon across parts of eastern Scotland into eastern England. And that will, although keeping things cloudy, turn things a little brighter into the afternoon. Whilst low cloud sits further west, covering the hills, bringing a few spots of drizzle, there will be some broken cloud. West Wales, western parts of England, western Scotland. Some sunshine coming through here. A breezy afternoon to come in the far southwest. I'm feeling a little on the cold side, but temperatures not far from average for the time of year. Into the evening and overnight, as that higher cloud drifts west, there will be some breaks developing, especially in the west and through central parts. And where that happens, we'll see a touch of frost, temperatures dipping 0 to -2 Celsius. Otherwise, low single figures to start things off on Tuesday. Again, a lot of cloud covering the map, but I think a better chance through the day of some cloud breaks, especially for parts of Wales into central, western England, and where we see some cloud breaks, some decent sunny spells emerging. So for a lucky few, a sunny day, but for many, another cloudy day, and a bit colder again, temperatures of 4 to 6 Celsius, and still rather breezy towards the far southwest. Outbreaks of rain or drizzle affecting the far north and northwest of Scotland, staying fairly damp here through Tuesday. But for the vast majority of the UK, it is a dry day, albeit rather cloudy. That's set to change on Wednesday. Areas of rain move north across the country, turning to snow over northern hills later.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
I'm Darren McCaffrey, and join me on The Briefing Monday to Thursday at 3 p.m. You'll get your afternoon fix of all the latest political stories, debate and analysis, as well as interviews with some of the biggest names in UK politics.
It's a problem that affects the whole world, Darren.
From Westminster to Cardiff, Edinburgh and Belfast, if it's happening in UK politics, we've got it covered. That's The Briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey, Monday to Thursday, 3 p.m. on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Now, new restrictions have come into force to ensure social distancing in Scotland. It's estimated that cancellation of bookings in Scotland could cost the hospitality industry over £1 billion. GB News Scotland reporter David Donaldson gives us the details in this report.
Empty seats in venues, a sight that is being replicated across Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. The Linlithgow Rose Social Club has had to cancel 3 sold-out evenings between now and Hogmanay due to the rules regarding social distancing. How much do you reckon this cost the club?
We're certainly way in 5 figures. Way in 5 figures.
I mean, that is a huge, huge loss, for especially for an organisation like this.
Yes, especially at this time of the year where, and obviously everything that's went on with the 2 previous lockdowns, it's very, very disappointing.
How difficult is it to continue, or is that just something you can't think about at the moment?
Going forward, we have various things. There's already been a birthday party cancelled the first week in January for the same reasons. And we're not confident of things taking place after that.
A few miles away, the Corby Inn in Bowness has seen bookings cancelled, which means a loss of revenue during the busiest time of the year.
Well, so far, as over the last couple of days, we've had, since the advisory to stop mixing, we've had 120 cancellations so far to date. So our rules have never changed. So we've just, since the whole pandemic, we just followed the whole rules and we haven't changed them or relaxed them in any way because we try to protect ourselves as well as our customers.
The Linlithgow Rose Social Club have been bringing hundreds of people back due to cancelling their festive nights. They were hoping to make some money after a tough couple of years and believe others are also affected.
The £37 included money that was going to be made for the social club, much needed revenue, especially with everything that's been going on. And obviously it's been the knock-on effect by caterers, cabaret artists and everybody that's been affected by this. And plus obviously ourselves with the amount of money it would be taken over the bar.
A lot of businesses in the hospitality sector are clearly feeling the pinch as the Omicron virus spreads quickly. And with First Minister Nicola Sturgeon advising people not to go out before Christmas, it's another huge loss in revenue.
David Donaldson there, GB News Scotland reporter in Linlithgow, West Lothian.
Well, a month ago, the government announced its new rail plan for North and Midlands. The integrated rail plan showed that plans to run HS2 trains up to Leeds would now mostly rely on existing lines, and the old HS2 Eastern leg was to be scrapped. But it seems the government isn't firm on this, keeping all options on the table, whilst those living along the old routes are left confused. Our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Kevin Larkin has been in Bramley near Rotherham for us and sent us this report.
Well, it was last month that the government launched its integrated rail plan, its big plan for trains across the North and Midlands, including Northern Powerhouse Rail and, of course, HS2. So last month we were told that the HS2 Eastern leg, which was due to come through the Shimmer estate, had in fact been scrapped. However, it seems the picture may not be as clear as we thought it was last month. We have had issues around the Department for Transport saying that while there is a review underway to examine how to get HS2 trains into Leeds, the safeguarding, as they call it, keeping these houses as an option for HS2 remains in place. And until that review of services up to Leeds is completed, these houses are still officially blighted. So this is a newly built housing estate. It was built back in 2016. And in fact, I was here in July 2016 when that route was shifted and it was announced that it would come through here. Now, it's a very different scene today, not just for weather, of course. There were people in the street crying. Lots of homeowners were young couples and families who'd obviously just moved into what they thought were their dream houses that they'd tailored because they were new builds. And then very quickly they discovered that they then have to move away. Now, HS2 has now bought the vast majority of these houses from those people who lived here in 2016 and rents them out. So many of those old owners have moved away. But under what's called the Critchell Down rules is that when this safeguarding is officially lifted, those former owners get the first dibs on buying the houses back at market value. Now, many of the people who used to live on this estate told me over several years that they would not want to come back here. There are too many painful memories for them, and as well as the hassle and expense of moving. So it's unlikely many of those people who did live here would come back. In total, HS2 has bought 450 properties since 2014 along the old eastern leg, which runs between Birmingham and Leeds, and they are worth a total of £115 million. So if and when they can be sold back, you would think that HS2 and the government would be keen to do so they can make some money in. But interestingly, this isn't the first time the route has changed. When the route was moved here in 2016, it was moved away from what was known as the Meadowhall route, going past the Meadowhall shopping centre near Sheffield. Now, that was 7 miles away from here, and that was ditched in 2016. However, properties there which had been bought in 2013 to 2016, which were bought as part of the HS2 project, still not one of those properties has been sold on 5 years on from that route change being made, which obviously raises a question as to how quickly the houses here which HS2 has bought would be released back to the public. Well, HS2, for their part, has refused to comment on this story, saying this is a matter for the Department for Transport. And the Department for Transport, they had a spokesperson give us this statement. We recognise the impact that HS2 has had on the residents of the proposed line, and that's why our compensation schemes go far beyond what the law requires. The government has now committed to explore the most effective way to run HS2 trains to Leeds, and it's important we safeguard properties until final decisions are taken. A failure to do so would cost the taxpayer more and cause greater uncertainty for residents.
That was Kevin Larkin, our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, giving us an update on the future of HS2.
You've been sending in your emails throughout the show on this important topic. Can the schools stay open after Christmas? Max says schools must be kept open at all costs. My young nieces need a proper education.
Yes, and Peter says my wife's school, as many others, didn't close anyway and won't be this time. They were looking after key workers' kids. I think that's a very good point.
Absolutely. Such a complex issue. I feel so invested in this issue because I've got kids of this age.
That's really understandable. I mean, I do worry so much about kids' education. It's been 2 years. That's, you know, you can never get that back.
Absolutely.
So
Tom emailed gbviews@gbnews.uk to say if there are no teachers because they've been infected with COVID, then the schools will have to stay shut.
Another very good point. Hilary says, nothing wrong with asking retired teachers to help out. Most retire at 50, so they are still of working age.
Laura emailed us, the schools are going to be closed over the holidays anyway. That should be enough. They don't need any more time off.
Yes, and Oliver says, why does everyone ignore the massive societal issues this could dredge up in 30, 40 years down the line because of closing schools? Very true.
Paul says, no, 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 no. I counted 7 no's in that message, and we've read all of them out.
Point taken. And Pete says, my wife's school, as many others, have never closed.
Keep emailing us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. We want to hear your views. This is your show too and your channel.
Yes, right after this break, it's all about your opinion. Join us for the next debate on Piero and Halligan. But first, here's the latest news.
Good afternoon. Let's get you up to date. Cabinet ministers are meeting this afternoon to discuss the latest situation and potential measures around COVID-19. Some ministers have reportedly pushed back against calls from scientific advisors for new restrictions before Christmas. According to the Times newspaper, around a third of the cabinet are said to be reluctant to introduce new measures in the next few days. The Deputy Prime Minister has denied his colleagues broke lockdown rules after this picture emerged showing the Prime Minister and his staff having cheese and wine in the Downing Street garden during the first national lockdown. The Guardian newspaper released this photograph showing the Prime Minister drinking at a table with Carrie Johnson and 2 others. 16 other members of staff are nearby. But Dominic Raab stressed the garden was a place of work and that sometimes staff would have a drink after a long day or a long week. In other news, at least 375 people have died. More than 500 are injured following the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines this year. More than 50 others are still missing. Officials say several central provinces are struggling with power and communication outages, and they're pleading for food and water. In the UK, sandwich chain Pret-a-Manger has been told it should consider reviewing its advertising campaign for a £20 a month coffee subscription. It's advice from the Advertising Standards Authority. Pret subscribers can choose 5 drinks every day as part of the deal. But customers have complained that they were often unable to get smoothies on the deal, as many shops said they were unable to make them. You're up to date. I'll have more for you at 3 o'clock.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to the debate with me, Untitled Chapter, and Liam Halligan. Thank you. Nadeem Zahawi has urged any retired or supply teacher to go back to the classroom and help schools out as they face staff shortages due to the spread of Omicron.
Some schools are already preparing for closure and anticipating the reintroduction of online learning, as disruptions are expected during the Christmas break and could last until the spring term.
So with all this in mind, we're asking, is it right to leave schools and remain open? We're now delighted to be joined by Wayne Dixon, who's a parent and a charity worker. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Dixon. I mean, what are your thoughts as a parent having kids' education disrupted for the past 2 years? What are your worries and thoughts right now?
Well, there's lots, to be honest. I mean, it's not an easy subject. I don't think there's any right or wrong answers. I suppose it's trying to find that balance, really, of protecting the most vulnerable in society, but at the same time, not damaging our children's education. So as a parent of a 5- and 9-year-old, I found it really difficult the first lockdown. With both myself and my wife working from home, the kids in the background, I often work with people with complex issues, and it's difficult with them running in the background. And it was really tough, and it wasn't really good for the kids. And to add to that as well, my children, for example, they play football for a local football club, and I support that. And I saw the fact that they stopped all the kids' football and everything had a massive impact on the children. And when they came back, the kids, you could tell it was really needed for them, like for their mental health rather than just their physical health. And I think it really damaged our children the first lockdown. And I mean, the first lockdown, I think most of us supported, and because none of us knew where we were going with it. But after that, I mean, as a member of the Social Democratic Party, I quite happily, realised that lockdowns didn't really work. They just delay the inevitable. And if you look across the world, I've not really seen where a lockdown has really made a massive impact unless they've literally had the military on the streets. and then even then I suppose it's debatable. But yeah, I mean the school bubbles, for example, when they were breaking down and the kids were coming home, and people were like, "What do I do?" I saw in my community where I live a lot of people on low-income jobs, and it just meant that those people were still working in the warehouses, the factories, the supermarkets, but they were relying on vulnerable people in the vulnerable group within their family to look after the children. So I'm not really sure it had any effect at all in protecting those vulnerable groups that we're supposed to. But I mean, 2 years on, we've still not moved any further, and we just kind of have to have a discussion now, I think, like, is how do we live with this? And, you know, how do we move on? Because I think if we haven't if we're not having this discussion 2 years down the line, then when do we have this discussion? It's kind of what I'm, you know, when do we, and how do we prevent more lockdown effects, such as like the, you know, Baby Arthur and Starhoof recently? You know, those kind of things are what we're going to be seeing a massive backlog of.
We all know, Mr. Dixon, that the government is advised by SAGE, you know, a group of scientists. I guess what you're saying is that there should be advice from many other quarters too, from sociologists, from psychologists, from educationalists, and this should all be weighed in the balance. We know what some of the scientists want, because, of course, many scientists outside of SAGE disagree with SAGE. But we know what SAGE want, not least because they so often leak their advice to newspapers. But surely what you're saying is that the government should take a broader approach and take advice from non-scientists too.
I think, yeah, I mean, what I want to say is, like, so Labour are the opposition, but where is the opposition? Why are they not asking for impact assessments? Do you know, who is opposing the government? Nobody. Is it just the general public who have to oppose the government? Do you know, stand up and oppose them, question them. Where are the impact assessments? Do you know, what's going to happen in the future? And then put that information to the public, and then say, this is why we need this, and be clear and honest with us. I think, you know, like when you talk, I'm a big supporter of people going and get vaccines, because I think that's the way out of it. But if people are hesitant, let's answer their questions and why they're hesitant, and then we can move forward. Because at the minute, I don't see those questions getting answered. I mean, like, why are we not saying this is what will change things? You know, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and this is to prevent X, Y, and Z, and then people can make an informed decision. Because I'm very much pro-choice, and I think people need education on, you know, what the government see and what they're thinking, what their stats are, what they're seeing and why, and then people can go home and say, okay, that's a fair point. I'll go do what, or I won't. It's their choice. But locking schools down is not going to benefit my kids, and it won't benefit the most vulnerable kids in society. And a lot of things from social care are picked up in schools. So for me, kids need to be in schools so we can protect the most vulnerable kids.
Powerful statement there from you, Wayne Dixon. Joining us from Leeds, Wayne's a parent and a charity worker. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Absolutely. Well, also joining us now is Director of Breslin Policy Education Consultancy, Tony Breslin. Thank you for joining us, Tony. I mean, what impact do you think lockdown is having on children?
Well, I think what lockdown has made very clear is that schools have far broader functions than just the educational. Actually, as we've moved through the lockdowns and the bubbles and everything else, we should give schools great credit for actually the amount of education we have delivered online with the support of parents through home learning and everything else. But how a 6-year-old makes up for a year's lost play dates, how a 14-year-old makes up for actually not jostling in the corridor. And I know that when I was in the classroom, that used to drive me mad. But actually, that's where young people, in a sense, learn their sociability. So the social function of schools is really important. But let's be clear, no two children, no two families have had the same lockdown. And one of the ironies is that schools have, of course, been open to vulnerable children throughout. And one of the things that we've found is that some vulnerable children made extra progress during the lockdown because they were in school in the smaller classes that they've always craved. So this isn't a single story. It's a really complex, nuanced one. And that's what we've got to be mindful of.
Of course, Tony, some families are better able to cope with lockdown than others. If you're from a professional family and one or both parents is working from home, can keep the kids on track, their academic progress can be maintained, not so much with disadvantaged families. And of course, there are all the other socialising issues that you talk about. I mean, how much more lockdown do you think this generation, particularly of younger kids, can take?
Look, I think it's been, I think young people have been remarkable in their resilience over this. I think you're absolutely right that so much of this to do with family setting and the rest of it. And what we've got to bear in mind is that different children have had wholly different experiences. I'm actually confident about what our young people can take. Many of those young people have developed new skills, new capabilities as a result of all this. They will come through. But what we have to do is make sure the support is there for them to do so. So when we're talking about catch-up, I've no doubt that children will, for the most part, catch up on the curriculum content. But as I say, it's that social stuff. How do we bring that into play? Our schools will be much stronger after this because now we have a teaching force that's far more skilled in supporting things like online learning, which, for instance, for children who are school refusers, is going to be a real strength in the future. So we have to look at this in the round, and we have to look at all of these issues. But I just want to say one thing. I wish that the Education Secretary and those making decisions would listen to the likes of Glyn Potts, the head at Newman in Bolton, who spoke on your show earlier. And, you know, it's something I've been saying as well. We should be getting... Ofsted inspectors shouldn't be inspecting schools at the moment. They're amongst the most skilled educationalists we have. They should be in there alongside us. So should school improvement advisors from local authorities. We should actually put all of that stuff on hold and use the skills of those people, because teaching is about relationships. And just supposing that a retiree can come in and suddenly fill a gap in an A-level course, of course it will work in some cases, but actually we need to be much more imaginative. The disadvantage that has been exposed by lockdown was not caused by lockdown, it pre-existed it. And what lockdown has done is exposed a lot of fractures in our society that are already there. They've exposed a teaching shortage that was already there. We need to deal with that. And just for your texter, most teachers don't retire at 50. I won't disclose her age, but my wife is a head teacher, certainly hasn't, and many more like her. So there isn't an army of 50 pluses knocking at the door to come back in, if only there were.
You mentioned that young people and students have been remarkably resilient, and we need to think imaginatively in terms of finding solutions. But does that still make it okay, what's happening? I mean, the knowledge, the interaction, all of those key moments in life that make up the memories of young people as they get older are being disrupted. So even if they are resilient and adapting, does that still make it okay or justifiable?
Of course it doesn't make it okay. You know, we've not wanted this experience, but in some senses we have to take what young people have drawn from it. For example, in my research for my book's Lessons from Lockdown and Bubble Schools, I've found strongly that at the top end of primary, teachers are saying that young people have greater independent learning skills that they normally have at that age. Well, they would have, wouldn't they, after all the homeschooling? But at the bottom end of secondary, teachers are saying to me and heads are saying to me that a lot of year 7s and year 8s are more socially immature. So there are ways in which some young people are gaining stuff. There are ways in which some young people are losing stuff. We have to deal with the situation we're in rather than the one we'd like to be in. And that's why the focus, as Glyn Potts said, should be on mitigation and should be, you know, arriving at the best alternative solution. There is no teacher out there, and certainly no parent out there, and I've got the same investment as you have, Liam. You know, I've got 2 children that I'll be schooling in a couple of weeks' time if schools don't reopen. Heaven help them. But we have to deal with the situation we're in rather than the one we'd like to be in. One thing that's interesting, of course, and I'm sure that the scientists are aware of this, when schools are closed, people know it's serious. And there is that sense in which when schools reopen, I think there's a tendency for the rest of us to take our foot off the gas a bit. And we're going to have to realise that this is serious, whether our schools are open or not, or whether maybe they're just open to exam groups or some other solution. What you can know is that school leaders and school teachers will do their very best to get children in front of them.
Tony Breslin, we've got to leave it there, I'm afraid. You're the director of the Breslin Policy Education Consultancy. Thanks a lot for joining us here on GB News.
Well, we're also delighted to now be joined by the chair of the Education Select Committee and Conservative MP for Harlow, Robert Halfon. Thank you for joining us. I mean, how determined is the government to keep schools open?
Well, I very much hope that the government means what it says when it says that it will keep. The Education Secretary said that he wants to keep schools open, but wanting and actually doing are two very different things. We know that 230,000 children were not in school as schools closed for the Christmas holidays and being sent home for one reason or another. We also know there was 100,000 separate children. I've called them, sadly, the ghost children, who've not even returned to school since schools reopened earlier on in the year. And what I'd like to see from the government, we keep talking about a plan B or a plan C. I'd like to see a plan KSO, which is to keep the schools open, to set up this army of volunteers. I completely agree with the argument that it isn't just retired teachers, but also Ofsted inspectors and other educationalists. We need to make sure that schools have the ventilation that they need. The government say they provided £100 million. Some schools are saying they still need help with this. And we need to have a network of supply teachers. So the government should be working with local authorities and academies, with local supply teacher agencies, to make sure that when teachers and support have to go home for COVID-related reasons, we don't see hundreds of kids in the school bubbles or years being sent home because there isn't the teaching capacity in that school.
Robert, briefly, you've been a huge, powerful advocate of keeping schools open, of course. How important is it that the attitudes of the teaching unions remain constructive if we are going to keep schools open after the Christmas holidays?
Well, I speak to ASCL, Jeff Barton, quite a bit. I think he is very reasonable on this. I hope that all the teaching unions will put the children first, because the last 2 years, and I'm not understating this, it have been nothing short of a national disaster for our children in terms of damage to their mental health, damage to their educational attainment, damage to their safeguarding, and damage to their life chances. We don't even know yet whether exams are now going to go ahead next year, and I'd like to see the government assessing every child in exam years to see how much lost learning those children have had before they make a final decision. So we need to keep our children in school because you weigh up the minimal risks of COVID with the real risks of their mental health and educational attainment and life chances.
Robert Halfon, thanks a lot for joining us, Chair of the Education Select Committee. We'll see what happens after the Christmas holidays. Yep, indeed. Well, you've been sending your emails in throughout the show. And Catherine says schools should stay open. Teachers can keep an eye out on children who are vulnerable and hungry. Children are safer in schools. Lanny says, I don't understand why we originally had to isolate from grandparents, but now that age range is being called back to teach in school. Well, also, you've been voting our Twitter poll throughout the show, and it says that 6% said yes to, as Omicron cases continue to rise across the UK, should the government close schools again. A staggering 94% of you said no, schools should not be closed. Well, that is a very strong message for many of the GB News viewers. Well, you've been watching Piero and Halligan on GB News. We'll be back tomorrow at 2 p.m. with me, Flaren Iman, and Liam Halligan. Thanks a lot for watching. Up next, it's Darren with the afternoon briefing.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. It's simply more of the same for many of us today. Cloudy again across large parts of the country. Something a little brighter in the east as the cloud lifts, and somewhat breezy in the southwest on the edge of this area of high pressure where the isobars are a little closer together. Now this cold front, barely noticeable on the map there, will introduce some slightly drier air and higher cloud bases, I think, through the afternoon across parts of eastern Scotland into eastern England. And that will, although keeping things cloudy, turn things a little brighter into the afternoon. Whilst low cloud sits further west, covering the hills, bringing a few spots of drizzle, there will be some broken cloud. West Wales, western parts of England, western Scotland. Some sunshine coming through here. A breezy afternoon to come in the far southwest. And feeling a little on the cold side, but temperatures not far from average for the time of year. Into the evening and overnight, as that higher cloud drifts west, there will be some breaks developing, especially in the west and through central parts. And where that happens, we'll see a touch of frost, temperatures dipping 0 to -2 Celsius. Otherwise, low single figures to start things off on Tuesday. Again, a lot of cloud covering the map, but I think a better chance through the day